Hello and welcome to episode number 2. How bad is the weather in England really? Of GOFIE, German old fart in England. Now, here's the thing. People have these misconceptions about us Germans that we all are really big into statistics, and while I'm very structured, I don't really care about statistics because statistics don't make a life. And so because people are asking this question, or this topic has come up a lot while I've been living abroad for the last 21 years, and obviously I have quite a bit of experience, with winters in different places, so to speak, and more colder summers than I had them in Germany. I will look and tell you a little bit about it, but please don't expect many statistics because, things do change a lot, and many countries have seen warmer summers and colder winters over the last 2 decades, let's just say, which is coincides with the time, with how long I have been living abroad. The only statistic I looked up basically was how many days it sort of rains in the UK, and I found something on a page that says over the last 30 years it was roughly 42% of the time. So apparently out of 365 days, it's been on average 156 days a year where there was rain. So that makes it 42%. The problem that you're having with these numbers is that even though people always tell me it's a really rainy country, we have had really, really rainy, absolutely bollocking down, shitty days, excuse me, and even weeks. I get it. But for the most part, I really love the outdoors. I have been outside here just as often or as much as I was when I lived in Germany, if that makes sense. So it's not everything. The funny thing is that obviously is the reputation. Because when I grew up as a child in Germany, and I was born in 1967, that's how old I am. So I grew up on some of these, movies where you would see London in the evening. It was always foggy, and then oftentimes when there were movies, because they were trying to make them moody, they didn't have to ask for artificial rain, because apparently a lot of these movies that were made in the 60s, low budget or whatever, they just waited for it to rain, and they could also almost count on that at certain times of the year it would just rain, if that makes sense. So it is definitely something that England is known for, and I would be stupid to say to you that that isn't true. What isn't true is that it is so bad that you really can't do anything at all. And that's good enough for me, if that makes sense. There's a couple of things that you have to remember. If you are a person that contemplates about moving to England, yes, the weather is not unimportant. But here's the thing. I have been burdened with asthma since childhood. And there are years where it is good and there are years where it is not good. Right? Does that make sense? Then the pollen count, hay fever is also a thing. I hate the term I suffer from it, because I don't really suffer, if that makes sense. It's just when it happens, it's shit for a while, and I have to take tablets which make me drowsy, but I get through it somehow. So I don't see this as necessarily majorly suffering. What I'm trying to say is this. When I lived in Offenbach, which is a city of about 650,000 people, next to Frankfurt, kind of thing. No, I messed it up. Frankfurt has 650,000 people, kind of thing, and Offenbach has much less. See, the point I'm trying to make is this. These two cities that I grew up with I spent a lot of time in Frankfurt, even though my childhood home, so to speak, and my years where I was brought up and where I went to school was a place called Offenbach. It's very close. And the reason why I always say to people I'm from Frankfurt is not because I don't like Offenbach. It's because you say that to people here, I'm from Offenbach, they go like, where the fuck is this? Point is, I don't want to explain myself 25,000 times. If I give them Frankfurt and tell them it's right next to it, it's true. Go figure. Right? Okay, back to the weather. Point I was making is, if you are a person that thinks, is England a country I would love? The weather really should not be the consideration number one. It's more about these days, can I make a living? How is the health system? All these things, to me, are far more important than the weather will ever be. But because I'm an asthmatic, and especially Offenbach apparently sits in a valley, so we had a lot of smog in Offenbach when I still lived there. And it meant that when the summer was really, 35, 30, 36 degrees, a young adult, so to speak. I remember a summer of 36 degrees in the early 90s. And so I was the palest German I knew, because I couldn't go out. Every time I went out, the pollen count was so high, I couldn't go anywhere, if that makes sense. So living in England and having lived in Ireland for 10 years before that, my asthma, while it is still an issue at times, is literally non-existent, if that makes sense. And yes, it would probably be easier if I lived anywhere close to the sea, which I don't. But the point I'm making is my asthma has improved so much simply because I don't live in a place that gets that warm. So to me, having colder summers makes sense. And yet, I've been living here for 11 years now. We have had summers where all of a sudden you reach the 30-degree mark, which means most English people are non-coherent. They don't function at all. The moment it is really, really warm, somehow they turn into these, and I don't blame them, but all of a sudden it's just too much for them. It's one of those things. And then when the winter starts here, we're looking at bad weather. When the winter starts here, everybody complains, right? Yeah, and I get that. But winter is something else entirely. From a German point of view, and I lived, like I said, in Frankfurt, so I didn't live in mountainous regions or in Bavaria, where my father, who passed away last year, in his last 20, 30 years of his life, he lived in what is called the Schwäbisch Alm. So it's Stuttgart, Schwabia, that sort of area, but he lived high up in the mountains. And he oftentimes needed spikes on the tires because he couldn't get up or down the bloody mountain. So there are areas in Germany where the weather is really bad. And I also, coming from Frankfurt, remember winters that were incredibly harsh and sort of never ending. I do remember winters when I was a young lad and I was an apprentice in the mid 80s, where it was minus 15, 16, 17 degrees, right? I remember all this. And yet, when it comes to England or living here, I know some of you people out there are probably even my friends from England, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but I come from a place where we have what I would call real winters. So if you had a winter where it is snowing non-stop, when nothing really works, that little bit of snow here, right, that sort of shuts down the traffic for hours or even days, and trains, bloody hell, right, all that kind of stuff doesn't bother me one bit. The one thing I would say, for instance, because of my health condition being an asthmatic, because England is much more moderate, also in summers, it aids my entire metabolism, if that makes sense, because I'm not that out of breath. So that makes sense to me. Also, when it gets a bit colder here, people go like, oh, bloody hell, it's bloody freezing, right? And I go, I don't feel it. And I remember, my girlfriend is English, and last winter, I have set my heating to, only, start working. I only have the heating on when it is really, really cold, which in her mind is never, the heating is never on in her mind, because I don't get cold, right? So we always had this, it's not a conversation as such, but she was like, could you put the thermostat down a little so the heating switch comes on earlier? Sure. And then, I turned it down to 15 degrees so it would come on much earlier, whatever. And then I was bloody roasting, right? So, and this is because I come from a different place, and somehow, even after living abroad for 2 decades, my metabolism, or whatever it is, doesn't seem to have changed all that much, right? So when it gets colder, I'm usually quite all right. I don't need 4 or 5 layers or 2 layers or whatever, because it just doesn't affect me that much. And the reason why I bring all this up is because when I've seen videos, and they're very black and white, even though they're in color, where people are saying like, oh, England is better than Germany, Germany is better than England because of the weather is this, and this is the statistics. And my take on it is that statistics oftentimes mean very little, because while a statistic can be powerful, you also have to look at how you tick personally, and what conditions you may have, and how they can improve or get worse when you live in a place that has a certain climate. And from where I'm sitting, I don't mind the rain, right? Because I have no problem with being outdoors, even if it is not quite that nice. Plus, there are tons, and there were tons of absolutely awesome summer days here. For instance, here in the UK, in Birmingham and in Cannock, I personally feel that that spring is absolutely beautiful. I also feel that autumn is not quite as harsh as it is in Germany. As it's not as rainy as it can be in Germany, for instance. And the point I'm trying to make is this: while it may be, or not just maybe, it is true that there's less rain in Germany, and there's much more rain here, because it doesn't get quite that cold, you do not feel it all that much. Now that might be different for my English friends who grew up here and who are therefore not used to having really low temperatures in winter and higher temperatures in summer. So to me, because I come from a place where temperatures really drop below 10-15 degrees, and they do that quite a lot in winter. So because this isn't really happening here, I don't even notice sometimes when it comes to winter as such what month it is. I can't figure it out, because when I grew up, and this probably goes across the board, a lot of people have also said that in conversations that I had with them. When I grew up, we would be able to know when a different season started. These days, it's all over the place, right? And it seems to be all over the place everywhere. So, bottom line is, it is raining not half the time in England, but 42% of the time in England, according to that one website that I just quickly checked on my internet here. It's 156 days out of 365 days on average, statistically, compiled over the last 30 years, if that makes sense. If this deters you, nothing I can do, right? Is this a country for people who really love to have long summers, and for people who are probably super fit, yay, and like to show off their bodies, right, in the summer? Probably not, if that makes sense, right? There's not that many days or weeks where people can really, if they have a beach body, where they could go to a beach and show off that body, which is why they all go to Spain. So keep on going to Spain, do it there. Go to Portugal, which is another favorite place of the English in summer, because it isn't really about that. If you wanted to live for you English people out there, if you ever felt you don't gel with the weather here, then maybe Germany would be an option for you, provided you can deal with the winters there, right? So I know I got off on a tangent. I'm just not a big fan of statistics. And like I said, it really is about looking at things individually, because you are an individual. And when you come over to England, while you really shouldn't try to be overly German, if that makes sense. Nobody has ever asked me to change my personality, but what has happened is my personality has changed. Sounds weird, I'm much calmer than I used to be, simply because in England the people are nicer to one another, right? Which brings me to the next thing. The next video will be about differences between the Germans and the English when it comes to behavior, from greetings to quirks and all that kind of stuff. And there might actually be some statistics there as well, which is probably quite interesting. I still hope you liked that video. I understand that if you read the title, How Bad is the Weather, and then I made a case of England is not so bad. It is my personal experience. It is also important to realize this, that you could live with me, right next to me, and have a completely different experience, because you may or may not like the weather the way it is. Cut a long story short, in the UK, whatever, when in comparison to Germany, you look at the summer here, you get out of a couple of weeks that the summer is actually happening. You're lucky if there is a week at over 25 degrees. It is not that common here to have prolonged hot weather, and I personally am grateful for it, if that makes sense. By the same token, come winter, I remember oftentimes in Germany from October to February, Germany didn't come to a standstill because people are so used to it there. And I know, but it's true. There is an efficiency in Germany, which is why a lot of things work much better, and it's also why they know the weather can be really harsh, so they do something about it and put things in place to make sure that by and large people can get from A to B, right? Which is also a learned behavior. If the weather wasn't that bad, probably nobody would have bet an eyelid, right? If that makes sense. So yes, summers are longer in Germany, hotter in Germany. There's much more rain in England, and much more pleasant autumn and spring in England, right? So I hope that was all good enough for you. See you soon. You were watching GOFIE, German old fart in England. Now go find something else to look at. Bye bye. See you next time.